Alright, so I wanted to make this video in order to discuss narrative in video games and its relationship to gameplay. And I'll give you spoilers ahead, spoilers up front. This is not going to be a funny video. This is more of a discussion video, so I just thought I'd throw that out there. So first of all, what is narrative? Well, according to the dictionary, narrative is an account of events, experience, or the like, whether true or fictitious. It also refers to the art, technique, or process of telling a story. Basically, when we talk about a game's narrative, we are talking about the game's story and how it's told. Now, for the majority of major AAA video games, the narrative and gameplay of a game have a very weak relationship, where one doesn't necessarily affect the other in a substantial way. For example, BioShock 1. So in BioShock 1, your progression in the game is fairly linear, having little to no option to deviate from the path given to you. Now, this is fairly rationalized through the plot point that you are being mind-controlled by the big bad in the game. However, once you break free from the mind control, through this logic, it stands that you should have more freedom in the way you progress, right? No. The gameplay maintains its same linearity before and after breaking free from the mind control. Another example can be seen in Fallout 3. Now, in Fallout 3, you are tasked with activating Project Purity in order to produce clean drinking water, and to do this you will ultimately receive a lethal dose of radiation and die. However, in the gameplay, the player has obtained so many items and perks throughout the playthrough that have been preventing lethal doses of radiation the whole game. These examples show just how thin the consistency can be between narrative and gameplay, and how sometimes they just seem separated. So let's talk both about how the gameplay can affect the narrative and the narrative affect the gameplay in a game. First, we'll talk about the simpler one, how gameplay affects the narrative. Now, I know what you're all thinking. Spenny, I make these choices in games all the time, like Walking Dead, that completely change how the story can end. Yes, that's true, but it's not so much the gameplay that changes it, but your individual choice. See, I don't consider dragging cursor over a dialogue box to necessarily be gameplay. This is just the style of these games. I like to call these the telltale games. The games that are focused intensely on driving a narrative that can change how the game can play out and end, but immensely lacks on gameplay. In these games, you're mostly looking at dialogue, which doesn't make them bad, but it's pretty much a choose-your-own-adventure book. You're not really playing that much. I'm trying to talk about the games that give you a good amount of liberty in its gameplay. So let's talk about a game with liberty in its gameplay that affects the narrative. One great example is the Dishonored series and the chaos concept. So in the stealth action game, choosing a lethal route will generate more chaos in Dunwall, causing your ending to be darker and less satisfying, while choosing a non-lethal route will maintain a low chaos level, which will result in a more optimistic and bright ending. So depending on what playstyle you choose and the actions you take in your gameplay, it will shape the narrative. Now, what's harder to do is have the narrative affect the gameplay, and this is why I wanted to make this video. This means that the story in the game actually affects the normal gameplay, no matter how big or small, in the game. So let me clarify this with an example from Call of Duty Black Ops. Praising a Call of Duty game on something it does well? Like, this guy might be a little bit insane. So in the mission Rebirth, the player controls Hudson and is storming an island when the enemy suddenly drops an extremely lethal gas called Nova 6 on him and his squad. To counteract this, Hudson and the others put on a gas mask and continue their operation, and the game shows this. Now, the game could have just done that as a quick cutscene to add a little teeny drama and leave it at that. But instead, the developers did something. They removed the regenerating health, which is a staple in the Call of Duty franchise, in order to illustrate how dangerous this gas is to the player. In this section of the game, when you take damage, your mask starts to break and you can't heal back. You actually have limited health. So the narrative of the game affected how you, the player, played this game. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is such a small little detail that doesn't really affect the game or anything like that. So why is this such a big deal for me? Well, because it completely changes how I view the story and how much impact the story has on me. Another example of this is illustrated through Nier Automata. So in this game, the player controls a variety of androids throughout the story, and at one point, the player is infected with a virus and must defeat enemies while traveling to a certain location. So let's see how the developers strengthened their story by integrating their narrative in their gameplay.
Alert. Virus infection detected. Proposal. Administer vaccine immediately. Alert. Virus contamination rate up to 21%.
Remove the contamination and reset.
The game decided to incorporate the virus into your video, your audio, and your gameplay. What was happening in the story completely changed how the player was able to play the game. The distorted video and audio you got, how your moves were disabled due to the virus, even your controls on your controller were mixed up. The way the gameplay changed due to the narrative made us feel like we were literally hacked, and allowed this moment in the story to resonate with us far more than just a cutscene. See, I believe when the narrative affects and changes the gameplay, like in that example, it makes the story of the game have a much greater impact on me, the player, and can completely change how I view and experience the story. And it's not major changes like those that can affect how we perceive the story. Even small changes can have a great impact. Take Spec Ops: The Line, for example. So to quickly summarize this game's story, you are an operative named Walker, who is tasked with entering and assessing a war-torn Dubai. Now this seems like a simple and easy mission, but as things progress, you and your squad realize that this mission is way more complex than you thought, and leads you on a path of death, misery, and destruction. Now, at the beginning of the game, when the squad is still sane and coherent, this is how they communicate with each other and engage enemies.
He's done! Target eliminated. Enemy down! Enemy down! Hostile down! Flash and clear, move. Here they come!
But after they descend into the hell that is their Dubai and do the things that they do, this is how they talk and engage enemies.
Kill is fucking confirmed! Got the son of a bitch! He's dead! That's one! That's another one! One moving out of cover! Son of a bitch!
These small details paint a big picture into the minds of these operatives and show just how the story is affecting them. Not only that, it completely changes how the player views these characters as well. This just shows again how progression in the story affects the gameplay for the player, and how beneficial it can be for a narrative. So the takeaway from this video is that a fully utilized narrative that can be integrated into other aspects of the game can give the player a better overall experience. At least for me, that's the case. So this is something I hope that more developers start and continue to do.